Hello, class, and welcome to Chapter 2. So, hopefully, you're enjoying the reading and you're settling in the course okay. So, we want to cover the second chapter, which is understanding yourself. Now, I realize in the first chapter, the introduction to communication, I kind of went a little bit longer than I anticipated. So, for that, I'm sorry. I'll try to be a little bit more brief this time. So, let's go ahead and start. So let's talk about self-concept. One of the major themes, and this is important to note in regards to communication, is that we communicate based off of our self-concept. How we see ourselves is very, very influential in how we interact and communicate and exchange meaning with other people. We have what's called self-concept, which is a relatively stable set of perceptions you hold about yourself. And then there's also self-esteem, which is an evolution of your self-worth. It's an evaluation of how you feel yourself, what you feel about yourself. So think about this. Are you a person that sees yourself as confident? Are you attractive? Are you engaging? Are you talented? Are you smart? Are you beautiful? Are you insecure? Do you feel people are out to get you? Are you suspicious of other people? Are you aloof? These types of things directly impact how you interact with other people. Do you have trouble trusting? Do you feel that maybe you're you're unworthy of something because of what you did? Maybe it's something you did in the past that influenced what you expect out of relationships moving forward. These things are all important to sort out because these things, if not resolved, if not pinpointed, can have direct impact on how you associate with other people. So now we're going to look at the influences of self-concept. So the book really points to four types of things. First of all, significant others. Let's take a moment to actually think about that. I want you to reflect on who is significant within your own life. Could be a mother, father, could be an uncle, maybe a brother, maybe a sister, maybe a teacher that you've had in the past. These types of influences have a lot to do with shaping your self-concept and what you think about yourself. Imagine a teacher that encouraged you when you needed it. Or imagine a teacher that was very discouraging and unvalidating when you needed the validation. These things help shape, for better and for worse, how we see ourselves and how we interact with others. Then along with that is social comparisons. So social comparisons are evaluating yourself in light of others. We do this all the time. You might sit there and say, I never compare myself to other people. In fact, we really do. And it happens on such a subconscious level that sometimes we don't even realize that it's happening. At the bottom, it's called a reflective appraisal. And that's the degree to which others, verbally or non-verbally, affirm or disconfirm our values. So if you've ever had a friend who lives in a household, or maybe you live in a household where there is where a family member disconfirms your value or says you're not important or gives you a certain look or a certain way of making you feel insecure. After a while, these things are going to really impact you and how you interact. So reflective appraisals are a huge source of our self-concept. Last is our reference groups. So think about what reference groups you belong to. Not all of us belong to the same reference groups. But if you're thinking about things like family, friends, peers, coworkers, those are really standard reference groups and good places to start. So our reference groups shape how we feel about ourselves. The friends that we hang out with after school, it could be our coworkers, right? It could be people from our church. So all these things are influential in shaping our identity. At the beginning of the class in chapter 1, we talked about how communication was essential to our identity. Think about it. The significant others, social comparisons, reflective appraisals, even our reference groups that we belong to. All these things are actually interacting with us and informing us and comprising our sense of self. So interaction with others is instrumental to forming identity and shaping who we are. So some quick principles about self-concept. One thing that you want to look at is how is your concept constructed? Do you think it's objective or subjective? Is it something that is concrete, or is it something that's reliant on other factors such as culture, family, work environment? And in these cases, there's a term that I want you to kind of understand, which is called cognitive conservatism. That's the degree to which we seek out or pay attention to the relationships and information that confirms an existing self-concept. So a lot of people will say this: I'm a self-made man, I'm a self-made woman, I am who I am, I don't allow anybody to influence me, I make up my mind, I make up my decisions, and they are objectively from me. I am a self-made person. Cognitive conservatism, the term, wants you to kind of take a step back from that and sit there and say, hey, in what ways do we, maybe unconsciously or subconsciously, seek out and pay attention to the relationships that confirm a sense of self? So if you see yourself as a hard worker, to what extent are you going to develop a relationship or seek to gather around you a group of friends that are going to affirm that sense of self? If you see yourself as a highly religious person, a devoutly religious person, to what extent are you going to seek out or find those relationships that are going to support the way you see yourself? So you'll see in the picture, and this is kind of a story, but you'll see in the picture here on the slide is a picture of Muhammad Ali. You might sit there and say, why is he relevant to this concept of cognitive conservatism? Reason why is because if you're a sports fan, if you're not, then that's fine, but this is a good example. Muhammad Ali was a very, very prominent boxer in the 60s and 70s, a three-time heavyweight champion. So as anything, as you get older, your body starts to not be as quick, and even great athletes have to succumb to age. It just slows you down. Not only that, but a lot of experts show that Muhammad Ali in his late 30s, I think he was 38 years old, was suffering from early onset Parkinson's. Well, in 1980, he decided he wanted to fight a gentleman that he had been sparring with, and Muhammad Ali was over the hill. And in that fight, Muhammad Ali took a huge beating. And the thing came from the fight. It's like, well, why did he lose such a fight? Who was around him to tell him that he was too old to box? Who was around him to let him know that at 38 years old, with early onset Parkinson's, he probably shouldn't be out in the ring fighting? And that harkens back to the concept of cognitive conservatism. Because if you look at the people who are around him and the people who were in his camp, those were kind of like yes men. People sitting there saying, oh, you can still do it. You still have it. So when you're looking at that example of Muhammad Ali, I look at it and personalize it to my own life. And you can do the same thing. Is who are you surrounding yourself with? Are you surrounding yourself with people who will sit there and automatically agree with how you like to be portrayed? Or do you surround yourself with people who will sit there and give you feedback, maybe that you don't want to hear, but will actually cause you to grow and cause you to look at yourself for what you really are, not what you really want to portray? So something to think about. So there's some additional influences of our self-concept that I want to talk about. So we have what's called culture. And culture is a shared identity of values and beliefs that a group of people has. Now what's important to understand is that culture is not the same as race. Okay? So culture is much more encompassing than that. And culture shapes the way we view the world. And not only shapes the way we view the world, but it also shapes the way we see ourselves. All right? If you see yourself as a person who's a part of, for example, my wife is from the Midwest. Being from the Midwest and understanding Midwest culture is essential to understanding how she comprises her identity. All right? So being a Minnesotan says a lot when you understand that culture. Some people might be from New York or from the East Coast. Some people might be from the South. Some people might be from California, might be from Southern California. Being from those different areas of the world, interacting with those different cultural groups, are a huge source of identity for people who belong to them. And so your culture, your community, your family, these are all things that shape how you see yourself and also how you see the world. So let's look at some elements of culture. So we have what's called individualistic cultures, which are Western cultures. And then we have what's called collectivistic cultures, which are typically Asian cultures. So in individualistic cultures, the word kind of speaks for itself. In individualistic cultures, the needs of the individual is put first. You can see in America, we value independence, we value ingenuity, we value being self-made. Where in collectivistic cultures, it's really about the needs of the group, which takes precedent over the needs of the individual. Also, our sex, our gender, that influences our our concept. Think about it. How we see ourselves as far as our gender roles, that determines how we feel about ourselves and how we interact with other people. What does it mean to be a man? You know, if you have a young man, if you're around a boy and he falls and he starts crying, maybe it's a little brother, maybe it's a nephew, and you sit there and say, "Hey, knock that off, boys don't cry." Then all of a sudden, as a young man, they see the world through that lens that, hey, in order to be a part of this gender group, I can't cry, I can't show emotion, I can't be vulnerable, I have to be tough, right? And so automatically people are walking around believing about themselves what they've been told that they're supposed to be within their gender or sex group. So that's something to really to look at, to the extent of how you actually interact within your own gender group or your gender identification group. And is that true and consistent with how you see yourself? Also, another factor that influences our self concept is self fulfilling prophecies. So, self fulfilling prophecies are an expectation followed by behaviors that reinforce the outcome. One thing I encourage students to do in all my communications classes is I say this a lot. I say control your self talk. And it doesn't mean that necessarily control you talking to yourself. What it means is that you need to control that voice inside your mind, right? Because that voice inside your mind is very influential in whether you're going to achieve something or not achieve it. There's a quote by Henry Ford. It says, whether you believe that you can or whether you believe that you cannot, you're right. I'll say that again. Whether you believe that you can or whether that you believe that you cannot, you're right. So your belief system, the voice that goes inside your head, that actually does a lot to determine what you believe about yourself and ultimately what will come to pass. I give an example for self-fulfilling prophecies, and I put that example on the test. It's a question, so I'll give you the answer to it. So self-fulfilling prophecies, I think I write that so-and-so, Susie, I'll give you a name, Susie believes that she cannot make the basketball team. So she doesn't practice, and eventually she gets cut. What term best describes it? It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. So if you sit there and say, well, I'm never going to make the basketball team, what happens is it brings along behaviors and attitudes that will ultimately cause that to not happen. If you sit there and say, well, I'll never lose weight, no matter what I do, yeah, that kind of talk is going to bring about behaviors and attitudes that are going to bring that result to pass. So it's really important to understand your role in shaping your own self-concept and also shaping what you get out of life, right? The most important communication to control is the communication that happens within you. Moving on, we're talking about presenting self. So presenting self, if you look over to the left of the screen, you'll see the show Catfish, a picture of the show Catfish. It's on MTV. I don't know if you've ever seen it, but it's a really interesting show. It has a lot to do with not only how we present ourselves, but also about technology. And I hope you guys got a lot out of the the discussion post from about technology and how we interact with digital devices. The reason why I give you these types of assignments is because I believe it's critical to question modern communication, modern technology, and the implication it has on how we interact with other people, and look at ethical and moral dilemmas that arise from these emerging technologies that reshape the way we interact with one another. And if you ever get a chance to, it's on MTV. This is a really interesting show because it fuses these two things together: identity and also technology and mediated communication. And if you watch the show, then I'm preaching to the choir. But if you haven't seen the show yet, watch it because it's really interesting. But a lot of these people meet online, right? And on the show, it's a reality show about people who meet online, whether it be a dating website or whether it's Facebook. And a lot of times, the person on the other end, like let's say a guy, uh, falls in love with a girl, but 8 times out of 10, the girl on the other end, who is typically always reserved to meet, they don't want to meet, they don't want to, get together. It's usually somebody different, or vice versa. It could be a guy who's interested in another guy, and it's not the person who's they're pretending to be somebody else on the other end. And so Neve, the guy in the black shirt, and his co-host, I forgot his name, they help these kids get to the, or not these kids, but these young adults get to the bottom of these online relationships. And it's a really cool show. But I want to bring this back to presenting self. So identity management is the communication strategies that people use to influence the way we view them. All right. So we use these identity management in our own interaction with one another. It's simple, you go to an interview, you wear a suit, right? Um, why do you wear a suit? Because you want people to think that you are professional, right? Um, there's a certain way you interact with people who are your friends. There's a certain way that you interact with people who might be at your church. There might be a certain way that you interact with your parents or your grandparents, or your boss or your supervisor or your instructor. So we are constantly going in and out of different roles of our identity. And what we're doing is we're managing how we present ourselves continuously and editing it continuously, depending on the context and the audience that we're in front of. And I don't think that makes you a sellout. It's just important to know that we do that on a very subconscious level. And there's what's called perceived self. If you see that in the blue, it's an honest reflection of who we really are. And then there's a presenting self, a public image, or the way that we want others to view us. All right. And some people can say it's being hypocritical or not being loyal. And there's our cases where individual can definitely do that. But in a lot of ways, it's just something that's normal, because we want people to see one thing when maybe we feel is another. And it depends on, again, the situation, the context. Maybe it's the loss of a loved one. And inside, you want to break down and you want to cry, right? And that's your perceived self, because you're hurt, you're saddened because of the loss of life within your family or somebody close to you. But at the same time, because of the context, let's say the context being you have younger siblings that look up to you, that need you as that rock, maybe you hold those tears back. Maybe you cover up your emotions and you don't show it, and you present somebody who is strong, who is confident, who is emotionally stable, because that's what this situation requires. So again, you have your presented self, but you also have your perceived self. And these things, sometimes we have to manage them depending on the context and the situation. Um, Identity management is collaborative. Both senders and receivers play a role in it. And on page 56 of your book, and you can read more, I want to encourage you to really read more about this. And on the first discussion post, I really hope that you guys got a lot out of that, because that's really important, is to really look at the extent that we actually manage our identities online. Think about Facebook, right? So I have a Facebook account. Don't add me, but I have a Facebook account. I'm sure a lot of you guys do. Some of you guys might have Twitter. Some of you guys might have Instagram, right? And on these media accounts, look at other people. I'm sure you know somebody who appears one way on their social media page, but you know they are a completely different person in real life, right? And they show one thing online, but they're completely different in person. So it's really important that as we continue to put more of our lives in social media, that occupies more of our time, to really begin to question to what extent are we actually creating a different identity online than we are actually doing in person, and do we have a responsibility as informed communicators to reconcile those differences. So this is a really kind of fun and interesting part about the relationship. It's called self-disclosure in relationship. So in case you're unfamiliar with the term, I think it's self-explanatory, but we'll go over it. Self-disclosure is a process of revealing information about yourself that would not normally be known to others. And the stuff that's known to others, we'll talk about that in a second. There's another kind of graph I have or chart that kind of will show that. But I want to talk about self-disclosure. So you'll see over to the left, there's pictures of onions, right? And you're like, why is this guy putting a picture of an onion on there? Well, your self-concept or who you are kind of looks like an onion. There's breadth and there's depth. So when you're looking at self-disclosure, some people get both of them confused. Breadth is the range of topics that are being discussed, which is kind of like the outer layer of the onion. Okay? And breadth is like sports, weather, um, what's going on in the news, current events, favorite foods, maybe, those type of surface level topics that don't really get people, you talk about, but don't really give people an inside picture of who you are, what makes you tick. Those type of surface level things are called breadth. All right. But when you start getting into the inner depths of who you are, your insecurities, your fears, bad habits, addictions, those type of things, those go more to the core of the onion, which is the depth, the deeper, more sensitive information. Privacy management comes into play because we make choices constantly in relationship to either conceal or reveal information to others. Have you ever been in a position where somebody's opened up to you with really deep personal information and you did not really, you felt uncomfortable because the relationship wasn't at that level for them to do so? Or have you ever thought that a person you can open up and share something intimate and very important to somebody, and you realize that you might have done that too soon? These are all mistakes that happen within privacy management. It's normal to happen in a relationship. So these are things that we have to really kind of be concerned about. And there are benefits to self-disclosure, like catharsis. Catharsis means getting it off your chest. All right. If you've ever held on to something so long, or a secret, or kept something buried inside of you, and finally you're able to open it up and release it, that's a cathartic moment. All right. And it feels good to kind of unload and get that off your chest, especially if you've been carrying it for a while. Then there's also reciprocity, right? Let's say you're struggling with your weight, right? And you kind of been, well, I don't know if you can hide it from people, but maybe you've been keeping it, haven't opened up to anybody about your struggles. Finally you do, and your friend sits there and says, you know what, I've been struggling with the same thing too. Or maybe it's the drug and alcohol problem, you've been hiding it from people. And then finally you find somebody you trust and you tell them about it, and they sit there and say, you know what, there's hope for you because I struggled with drug and alcohol addiction too, and I can tell you that you can overcome it. That's really neat when you have somebody who you can open up with and they can say, hey, I've been there, I've had those similar struggles. So reciprocity is another benefit of self-disclosure, but there are also risks, which includes rejection, right? Somebody who has a negative impression of you, you tell them something secret and they never look at you the same way. Decrease in relational satisfaction, or hurting the other person, right? The topic that would come to my mind is cheating, right? If you were to sit there and tell a boyfriend or girlfriend or spouse, hey, listen, I had this kind of relationship with the other person, it could be cathartic, but to get that off your chest, but at the same time you could really do some damage to that relationship. At the same time, they can also use reciprocity and say, hey, I cheated too, which could decrease your relationship satisfaction and hurt your feelings. So self-disclosure is not an exact science, but it's something to always keep in mind of how we disclose information and look for the best situations in which to do so. So earlier I said that I'd explain it, so I want to go ahead and take some time to explain it. Johari's window. So we talked about breadth, we talked about depth, we talked about self-disclosure, right? And we also talked about privacy management. So in what ways do we open up to people? In what ways, how does that actually unfold? Well, this is kind of a really good way to kind of look at it. So Johari's window kind of explains this. And if you look over to the upper left-hand corner in the orange, let me just preference this. These four boxes represent who you are, right? You have the open side, which the open part of you, the window that's open, is what people see and know about you. Okay? So what you guys see and know about me is I'm a teacher. I teach at Gateway Community College. I teach communications. I'm a male, right? But blind, there's every one of us have a blind side, right? So this is stuff that when you interact with people, these are things that oh, you know what? I don't want to go there yet. Let's actually take a step down. Let's go to hidden. Hidden, which is right below open, are things that you keep from people. For example, you guys know that I'm a teacher at Gateway Community College. I'm a male. You guys might be able to figure out if you looked at any of the pictures that I'm African American. But you probably don't know where I live. You probably don't know what my social security number is. You probably don't know what my credit score is because it's none of your business. This is information I keep hidden from people. My wife knows, but most other people don't. All right. So, what things in your life do you keep hidden from people, and why do you keep it hidden? And at what point do you reveal those things? At what point do you reveal your credit score? At what point do you reveal any habits or addictions or things that you've been going through? When is the relationship ready for that yet? And these are all things that you have to sort out. In the upper right hand corner is blind, and these are blind spots. These are things that uh, you might know or other people might see, but you're blind to it. So you might think that you are the most charitable, giving person ever, and your friends think you are stingy, right? Maybe you think you're the best, most kindest, most generous friend who listens and cares for people, and your friends think that you are a two-faced liar, right? So these things, you might actually think of yourself one way, but your friends might actually see something totally different. And these are areas of yourself that you're blind to. And then the last part, which is in the darker green, is the unknown. These are the parts of your persona that are not known to you and are not known to people who are around you, and things that you might have to find out later on. Self-disclosure guidelines. So before self-disclosing, consider, is the other person important to you, right? If they're not important to you, you might want to pause and see if that's something you really want to disclose. Is the amount of information and the type of disclosure appropriate, right? Because you might not want to disclose something that's really, really sensitive to a person that isn't close to you, doesn't really need to know. Is the risk of disclosure reasonable? Will the effect be constructive? Is it self-disclosure reciprocated? And do you have a moral obligation to disclose? Okay, so if you're, it could be in a situation where there's a crime. There might be where you have a moral obligation to disclose something. There's been situations where people have been diagnosed with maybe an infectious disease, right? An STD, all right? When is it moral or right for you to disclose those things? These are things that always have to be considered. Alternatives to self-disclosure could be lying, which is not that good. And then there's silence, there's hinting, and then there's also equivocal language, which is kind of making ambiguous statements, that have two or more plausible meanings.